Welcome to Tanuki Fishing Webinar. Fly fishing with Tenkara rod. The fundamental of Tenkara rod fishing with my cement. The last two parts we talk about rod and line. This is a part 3, all about the flies. Matt is going to take it over. Welcome back, Matt.
I am back. If everybody's ready to proceed.
I think so. You just go ahead.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for your patience there, folks. We're going to move on and finish up the equipment part of our talk here and talk about flies. So straight up, you may or may not have heard any of these terms or some of these terms, but we're going to kind of move through here and discuss kabari. And what a kabari is, it simply means fly. And the way we use it, at least in America, is to differentiate between Japanese patterns, fly patterns, and American patterns. And that's basically it. There's really not special magic to Tenkara flies. In fact, they do tend to be more simple than most patterns do. So the opposite, if anything. But when we say kabari, we're referring typically to a fly of a Japanese origin. But that being said, you don't have to fish kabari with Tenkara. You can fish just about any fly you like. We'll get to that in a moment here and talk about kind of some different applications and how those work. But first of all, traditional Japanese kabari for Tenkara are typically wet flies, sometimes tied with small beadheads. The information we have about historical patterns, they mostly are all wet flies, and then you'll see a beadhead or two attached to them. But they're not big patterns, they're not clunky patterns. They're usually pretty small and understated, and that is typically because a lot of the fish species that the Japanese were fishing for were smaller. So of course they're going to match their patterns to their fish like any good angler would. But that being said, as I said earlier, you don't have to fish kabari with Tenkara. You can fish just about anything, and many American patterns perform in the same ways as traditional Japanese kabari. For example, like your average just plain old soft hackle is pretty much a European or a non-Japanese version of a kabari. It just has some slightly different hackles and is tied in different ways. Stuff like your Royal Coachman even is really, there are traditional Tenkara patterns that look kind of like a Royal Coachman. So don't be afraid. I guess what I'm saying here is when you are choosing Tenkara rod fishing flies, you can certainly focus on traditional Japanese kabari, but you can get the same effects and do the exact same fishing with American/European or whatever you want to call conventional fly patterns. You can throw a caddis on, I mean, you can work just about any fly that you are comfortable fishing normally on a Tenkara rod. And I will argue with just about anyone that streamers are actually better fished on a Tenkara style rod or a fixed line setup than on a conventional setup, because I feel I can do much more, a much larger variety of actions and motions and manipulations with a streamer with a fixed line rod than I can with a conventional rod. So don't be afraid to branch out. You could just you could pick a number 12, number 14 woolly bugger as your Tenkara fly and fish the rest of your life and do great. You don't have to be fishing traditional Japanese kabari. That being said, they're effective patterns. They work well here in the US just as well as they do overseas. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole and learn how to tie them and fish them and everything, there's a lot of great information on that. I personally believe that Tenkara rod fishing is mostly agnostic of fly choice. And if you saw my article in the most recent Tenkara Angler magazine about how that came about last year, I basically fished random flies the entire season last year in Wisconsin, North Carolina, Colorado, Utah, and California for about 6 months straight. I basically just grabbed a random fly out of my box because that's really all I had was a big random pile of flies. And it largely was transparent to my ability to generate success with fish. They were all, probably size 10 to size 16. And as you can see on the screen here, your size 8s to 16s are probably the most common size choices. But for the most part, I was able to have a great season randomly selecting flies. This season, I'm very much considering choosing one single fly pattern, in which I will allow myself the ability to change sizes. But I think I'm going to choose one fly pattern and just roll the whole season on trout with that. Because last year, I really came to the conclusion, at least for me, that the fly choice was really probably one of the last priorities in that I needed to worry about. So keep that in mind. And don't forget bigger stuff too. Masami Sakakibara, Oni, widely considered the greatest living Tenkara rod fisherman on earth. He often, fishes size 8 and size 6 kabari, like wet flies, a lot. Especially if the fish aren't moving. He upguns the size that he's fishing and he puts it in their face. So yeah, don't be afraid to drop down to those larger sizes either. And keep in mind that being able to see the fly is very useful. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about control here in just a moment. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I hate to be disappointed. I'm sure some of you are very disappointed by the fact that this is one slide for flies. But yeah, I mean, honestly, just about anything size 8 to 16 that you normally generate success on your waters with is going to work on a Tenkara rod. And if you decide to specialize and go in a different direction, you're going to determine what flies you're using for that specialized use to begin with. So I don't even want to tell you, hey, try this fly out, so much as try what works for you already, or try what is the most common, simple regional pattern you have, and put that to work. Before we move forward, does anybody have any fly questions?
There's a lot of fly question there.
Okay, I do see a question here from Jeff D.
Yeah, people need to, would you put all your thing into the answer and question and answer panel, so that's easier to keep track of who we already answer? We also have a very long question on the chat too as well.
All right, so the question says, sounds like you like smallmouth. Ever throw small to medium streamers? Oh yeah, dude. So actually, like I said earlier about like the bass jig that I had to hold onto the rod with my right hand and throw out with my left hand, we've done a significant amount of testing. And actually, we do a lot of streamer fishing for bass and even pike. Depending on what rod you're fishing is really going to limit the size that you're throwing. But I will tell you that on a regular 12-foot standard American manufacturer Tenkara rod, I'm talking about the Badger, Classic specifically, but that really is very close to most 12-foot American manufacturer Tenkara rods. We were throwing weighted size 6 streamers and unweighted size 4s. Like some pretty good size stuff. We're throwing, stuff at pike. We're throwing stuff at small, some good size stuff and poppers. You'll be able to throw a larger popper than you think you should, probably comfortably, as long as you don't put too much pressure into the cast, because you don't want to launch it. But yeah, streamers on a standard American manufacturer Tenkara rod, up unweighted up to size 4, weighted up to size 6. Highly successful for bass, pike, and in some cases trout and carp. Yeah, okay, I got 2 more fly questions here. One is, what would that single one fly for the summer be? Chuck, what I'm looking at is I found some really super cheap, just orange soft tackles for 27 cents each if I buy them in bulk. So I was thinking I'd spend $60 and drop 100 of those. I might tie. I've got an idea for a pattern I might use too, but it's going to be simple. It's probably going to be orange or yellow with black and a grayish brown hackle. that is kind of a medium stiffness hackle. Or if I can find a good source for the Pass Lake wet fly, which is my favorite non-Japanese pattern in the world, and has produced for me everywhere on every type of fish I've ever fished for. I would do that too, because that's just that is my confidence fly, Chuck. If you've ever heard the term, is the Pass Lake. So it would either be the Pass Lake, or I'm looking at just a very simple orange or yellow soft hackle wet fly. Nelson wants to know if wet and dry flies are equal in my experience, or if one is more suited to Tenkara. So Tenkara rod fishing, specifically designed in Japan to manipulate wet flies. I mean, that's what this piece of technology, what this tool was invented to do. So it is incredibly well suited to manipulating and fishing wet flies. That being said, like dry flies aren't too hard to fish, really. Like you launch it out there and you maintain your drift and everything. So, I mean, dry flies on Tenkara rods are deadly. Like just a size 12 or 14 Alcara caddis. I mean, like seriously, like if trout, let alone any other fish, are eating off the surface anywhere in the summer, like you're probably going to be able to get them to take a size 12 or 14 caddis. I mean, that's really just like almost like if you had to pick one fly that you could almost always count on. So like I always have, like, I don't fish them a ton because, like I said, I get into kind of doing weird experiments and stuff, but I always have some Alcara caddis with me. They're just a generally easy and highly effective pattern to fish. So I don't think either one is better suited to Tenkara naturally, although wet fly, the system was designed to manipulate wet flies. And hopefully that meets the mail there, Nelson. Okay, so hey, let's move on a little bit here.
We have one more question.
Oh.
Mark Devoki have a question on kabari intend to sink or to be float.
Great question. Okay, so typically you're gonna a kabari, a regular Japanese pattern without a bead head or anything, is just an unweighted wet fly. So if you're going to sink it, you're going to use current or technique in order to sink it. If you're going to float it, you certainly could use floatant. There's nothing stopping you, but you could also use line tension and rod tip control, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, and just use the characteristics of the system to keep it in the filament on top of the water, which is what I like to do. And because again, like the more I start adding floatant and the more equipment I start adding, the more stuff I start losing. Which is, like anyone that knows me knows that like all of my fishing gear is literally tied to me. So I typically tend to not go too far down that rabbit hole, but you can sink or float the fly on technique or with some sort of mechanical, piece of equipment, be that, you certainly could use split shot if you wanted to. I mean, if you're doing that stuff, you're getting farther and farther away from traditional Japanese Tenkara or even modern sport Japanese Tenkara. But this isn't like, there's no rule book here. If that's how you want to fish, fish it. But yeah, you can use split shot. You can use floatant. You can bring in all of those tools that you use in other aspects of fishing if you choose to. But I really do firmly believe that there is enough tools in the box with technique that you don't have to use those things. So yeah, hopefully that hits the wickets there. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next screen, folks.
I just have a quick answer for one question in here. Somebody want to know about this one being recorded or not. Yes, it's recording and then put it onto YouTube so you can watch it later.
Awesome. You can fall asleep at night to the sound of my sleep voice, folks.
And actually, you're going to chop it out into the section, the rod, the line, and the fly. So it's easy for you to follow that. So you don't have to.
Well, that's very cool, Lon.
Yeah.
So just a few notes about designing your own systems. And by system, I'm referring to kind of the whole set of tools we use, which is the rod, the line, the tippet, and the fly. They all come together to create a system, which is a tool that we're using to catch fish. And I really encourage you to experiment with that system, with different line choices, with different grips, which we'll talk about in a little bit, with different fly choices. Just really try different things out. Like, don't write stuff off until you've tried it. But I do recommend that you experiment slowly, because if you're changing your rigging, like, every 10 minutes or even every fishing outing, you're not going to be able to really start to dig in and observe what's working and what isn't, and really start to ask yourself questions like, why is that working versus it isn't? So you'll lose a lot of lessons in doing that. So I do encourage you to experiment and really customize, individualize your Tenkara rod fishing experience. Do it slowly and deliberately. Learn the feel and characteristics of your rig so you know what your favorite, for instance, I'll put it this way. Some people have one rod, other people have several rods. I've got one rod in particular that I fish a lot. And I tell you what, I can tell, that I can pick that thing up, and if there's different flies tied on it, I can feel the difference in the weight just in my hand, let alone on the water when I'm drifting it. And when you get to a point where the natural extension of your cast, when the natural weight of a rod plus rod length of number 4 level line plus 6 feet of 5X plus a size 12 pass lake, when you're familiar with that, you can really sense what's going on in the water a lot better. And it starts to open up a whole nother level of manipulation and control over your fly. So experiment, do it slowly, and really spend some time getting familiar with your rigging. And you'll really be able to customize your experience and really start to expand your knowledge on what you're doing, I think. So I just want to kind of throw that out there before we hop into technique. I guess before we go further, any saved questions from the beginning? Not that you can't ask them at the end, but is there anything that we want to address before? Multiple flies. You certainly can, Peter, and when I do that, it's very rare. I don't do it a lot. When I do that, I typically, space them out about 12 inches at the end there, in the same manner you would with a conventional rod. If you want to do some interesting research, there's an Italian form of fixed line fly fishing. I think I'm probably going to mispronounce.
Valsiana.
Yeah, it's Pesca Valestiana, and they use 7 flies at a time, which to me means I would lose 7 flies at a time in a tree. But they use some, I think, closer to 20-foot rods, and they use 7 flies at a time, and that multiple fly thing is like it's the whole basis of that fishing system. So yeah, look into that, Peter Monsell, and then also experiment with rigging on I mean, I hate to say hopper dropper, but yeah, it's the same principle. I mean, you can do wet fly with a smaller wet fly or nymph below it, or a couple nymphs or what have you, whatever you're comfortable with, but by all means, check it out. I find when I've got multiple flies rigged on that I don't cast as well because I don't target as well, because I'm never quite sure which fly I'm trying to put where. But that's just me. So I do occasionally fish a 2-fly rig. Haven't in a while, but you can. I encourage you to check it out, and just slow your cast down a little bit, because you're going to have a little bit more payload back there, a little bit more to snag on. So just slow your cast down a little bit when you do it. Okay.
There is the movie that Patagonia put it out about Valsiana in Italy, and
Yeah.
they use the multiple flies, and the fly look exactly like a Tenkara fly, a kabari style, and actually it's in Italy, and it also a traditional hundred of years old fly too. So they're really similar fly. It's just only different is one fish with one fly, another fish with a multiple flies.
It'd be fun to try sometime.
Yeah.
I think 7 flies, I'd end up with like half of them in me, but but we'll see.
They go maximum to 9 flies in Italy.
Man.